Hi, it's Andy and I'm coming to you today with my July wrap up. I am very aware that I am late to the game. It is now mid-August and this is the first chance I'm getting to do my July wrap up because I went back to work last week and then took another week to recover from going back to work. So I'm filming it now, better late than never, and yeah, I'll just get right into it. So in July I read 15 books, which is really good going for me. I never usually read that many books and I'm really proud, and it will probably never happen again. So I will jump right in and tell you all of the books that I read. The first two books I read were actually companion novels, and those are Codename Verity and Rose Under Fire. These are both World War II historical fictions and they follow air auxiliary transport pilots who are women pilots and injured male pilots who ferry and taxi planes and people, mostly officers, around the UK and sometimes into war zones for the war effort during World War II. Codename Verity follows Julie, who has been captured as a spy in France by the Gestapo. They then question her and she decides that she's going to tell them everything. All that she knows about the ATA, all that she knows about the airports, anything that she knows to stop herself from being tortured. She does this through telling the story of her best friend Maddie, who is one of the ATA pilots. So most of the way through this book you get Julie's story from her capture to the point where she's being transported to Ravensbrück. That then switches to Maddie's perspective and you get Maddie's story of the point where Julie goes missing until the end of the book, where it all concludes, and I'm not going to spoil what happens. So I'm just going to leave it at that. This gets a 5-star. I have always given this 5-star. This is my second time reading this and I absolutely loved it. This is a story that always stays with me after I've read it for years, and I absolutely love it. Rose Under Fire then follows another ATA pilot called Rose Justice. She also gets captured and is taken to Ravensbrück. We then see Rose's story in the first half of how she becomes captured, and then in the second half after she's liberated and she's telling her story of how she got captured and then her time at Ravensbrück with the other female prisoners, because Ravensbrück was actually a female concentration camp. It is a harrowing story, it is painful, it is extremely upsetting to read because a lot of these experiences are real experiences, perhaps not by one person, but these are real things that happen to real people. And again, like Codename Verity, it stays with you, and it stayed with me the whole time after I read it. This again is a second read for me, 5 stars, absolutely loved it. We also see Maddie in this, as Maddie is a friend of Rose's, as she's also an ATA pilot, and Maddie is dealing with what happened in the previous book, but then also has to deal with Rose going missing, and then Rose's recovery when she comes back from the concentration camp. These are both by Elizabeth Wine and both come with trigger warnings for torture, bodily harm, sexual aggression and sexual assault. The next book I read was The Colour Purple. This is by Alice Walker and it is set, I'll just read the back because it's much easier. Set in the deep American South between the wars, The Colour Purple is the tale of Sally, a young black girl born into poverty and segregation. Raped repeatedly by the man she calls father, she has 2 children taken away from her, is separated from her beloved sister Nettie, and is trapped into an ugly marriage. But then she meets the glamorous Shug Avery, singer and magic maker, a woman who has taken charge of her own destiny. Gradually, Sally discovers the power and joy of her own spirit, freeing her from her past and reuniting her with those she loves. This is an Own Voices book because Alice Walker herself is a black woman who lives in America, and it basically shows the life of this woman. It's really interesting and also has some LGBTQIA+ rep in there, which is really interesting and really unexpected, especially since this book is a historical fiction and you're already dealing with a lot, to just add that little sprinkle in was really surprising. Definitely trigger warnings for things like rape and incest, again, bodily harm and racism. So I gave this 4 stars. It was a fantastic book, definitely worth a read, definitely recommend, although go into it knowing that it isn't going to be pleasant. It isn't a fun, light-hearted story, it is hard-hitting, although extremely informative. Next up is The Black Flamingo. Now this has been really popular on BookTube at the moment. I keep seeing the reflection of this in the viewfinder and it's really nice. I really like this cover, the UK cover, it's so shiny, and this is partially why I picked it up. This is written in prose, and I am not someone who really reads prose, although I did really enjoy it. You've got these beautiful lines and then interspersed with illustrations. It's stunning. I absolutely love this book. I gave it 4 stars. It is about our character Michael, and he is going to university and really thinking about himself for the first time. He realises when he's younger that he's gay, and tries to join the LGBTQ+ society in the university, but still doesn't feel like it's his place. But then he finds the drag society, and all of a sudden he's found these people, and you basically have stories from him as a young child up to university, and his place in that world, and how as a young black man he negotiates that. It's extremely interesting and such beautiful writing. Dean Atta is a fantastic author, and I will definitely buy any more books that he comes out with, just based on this, and considering I don't read prose, this definitely blew me out of the water. The next book I read was actually an audiobook, and that was Caramo, which is a memoir written by Caramo from Queer Eye, which is on Netflix, which I really think everybody should watch. They do a fantastic job, and it's in the South in America, which, considering they've got a huge range within just the 5 of them of people who are not really liked in the South, it's incredible. Caramo has written a memoir, as most of them have, and it follows his journey as a young black man in America, his struggles, his time on a reality TV show and how that formed how he is today, and of course when he discovered that he had a son that he never knew he had, and subsequently ended up adopting him, or not adopting him but taking him in full time along with his brother, who is not actually Caramo's biological son, but in all intents and purposes he is his son. It's a fantastic read. It is definitely a tearjerker. It was a 5-star for me. I would absolutely recommend it, and I would recommend the audiobook because Caramo reads it himself. Next book I read was Ghosts of the Shadow Market by Cassandra Clare, Sarah Reese Brennan, Maureen Johnson, Kelly Link and Robin Wesserman. So this is a collection of short stories from the Shadowhunter world, and it follows the Shadow Market, as you can imagine, but it also centres around Jem from the Infernal Devices. I love this. It goes from, you know, Infernal Devices all the way through to Mortal Instruments, following the Shadow Markets and the significance they have in the Shadow world, and all the different experiences that Jem has had in relation to other characters that we know and love. This was a 4-star for me. I am not the biggest fan of short story collections, but I absolutely love the Shadow world. I love learning more about the Shadow world, and so yeah, I couldn't give it anything lower than a 4-star because I loved it, but I couldn't give it a 5-star because I didn't love it that much. The next book I read was also an audiobook, and that was Black and British, A Forgotten History by David Olusoga. I listened to this on audiobook because I couldn't get my hands on a physical copy because COVID, but I will be buying a physical copy because it was incredible. It goes through the history of Black Britons from Roman times all the way through to modern times, and it is a very thorough history, although there is obviously more to learn. It was a 24-hour audiobook, and I ended up giving it 5 stars because the amount of information that was in there really changed my perspective on so much, and it is definitely worth a read, especially if you're British, especially if, you know, you're interested in Black history, because Black history isn't a recent thing. Black history isn't just from, you know, the Windrush, and Black history is not just American. So if you get a chance, definitely read this book, listen to the audiobook, watch the TV show, it is incredible. So the next book I read was also an audiobook, and that was Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. This book is also told in prose, which is why I hadn't read it before, but since the Black Flamingo was such a hit, I decided to give it a try, and I'm glad I did because I really, really liked it. This book follows 2 sisters, so there's Camino and Yahira, and they have the same father, although one of them lives in the Dominican Republic and the other lives in New York. And they discover this when the plane that their father is on to go to the Dominican Republic crashes, and this is actually a real flight that crashed after 9/11, and since it was deemed not to be a terrorist act, it was forgotten, despite the fact that it killed everyone on board, and there were so many Dominican families that were completely devastated by this. So through their father's death, they then discovered that they had the same father, and they then have to come to terms with having each other, and the resentment that they have built up just over the short period of time, knowing that their father had lied to them, and, you know, thinking that the other had the better side of it. I really loved this book. It was a 4-star read. Again, I'm not the biggest prose reader, and I really wish they'd put in more at the end. Elizabeth Acevedo is actually Dominican herself, so this is why she wanted to highlight this crash. But to me it ended really quickly, and I have heard a few more people say that it ended really quickly, and it wasn't quite satisfying. I would have liked a bit more. Honestly, I could have done with another 100 pages. I would have just eaten that up, because the girls were so relatable and I absolutely loved it. The next book I read was Wind Witch by Susan Dennard. This is the second book in a fantasy series. The 4th book is still yet to be released, and this is following political intrigue in this world called the Witchlands, and there are different kinds of witches. So you've got wind witches, truth witches, blood witches, thread witches. They all have different abilities linked to that witchery, and a lot of this is following political intrigue, because we've got our characters are a prince, a monk, a nomad who has even been rejected by her own people, and also a domina, which as far as I can understand it is like a lady, so she's quite high up in the rankings, but is not in charge of anything because it's her uncle's family. This got 4 stars. I loved the characters, I loved reading the story, but fantasy worlds I do struggle with. This is a bit more high fantasy than I'm used to reading, so it took me my time to read this book, and to get my head around. So yeah, that kind of ruins it a little bit for me, but I still really loved it, and I still couldn't stop thinking about the characters and wanting to read them more and hear from their perspectives more. Although the more characters they added, the more complicated it got for me and the more I struggled, although I will continue this series. Following up from that, I also read Blood Witch by Susan Dennard. That is the next novel after Wind Witch, for the Witchlands series. This again just follows on from the second book, gets more complicated, more characters are added, and I still really loved it. Again, it was a 4-star read despite the fact that it was higher fantasy than I'm used to, and I did struggle to get through it. I think now that I know what's going on somewhat, I might reread these books just to get a better idea before the 4th one comes out. Next thing that I read was Simpsons on Parade, which was a collection of Simpsons comics. I do not read comics, I do not read graphic novels, I do not read manga. I am not a very good artwork person. I would rather read it in words than look at the pictures, and I must be the dumbest person ever because I could not understand what was going on in these comics. I could not get my head around it. I am most definitely not a comic book reader. This got a 1 star. I really did not like it. I just wanted to get it finished, and it took me so long, despite the fact that it was a comic. It just kind of cemented there for me that this is not really my style, and it had ads in it as well for things, and I really didn't. There was no parade. Why? I don't understand the title, because there is no parade. This never happens. I don't understand. 1 star. Just not worth it for me. I only read that because it's part of my newts, and one of the prompts was to read a comic. So yeah, got that out of the way, did not love it, would not do it again. On the opposite end of the spectrum, the next book I read was Fantastic Mr. Fox by Roald Dahl. I love this book. It is tiny, it is a children's book, it is so simplistic, the artwork is so classic, so beautiful. I loved it. 5 stars. Has been my favourite Roald Dahl since I was a child. I can reread this and still love it. This is about Mr. Fox, his wife Mrs. Fox, and their 3 little children who live under a tree by 3 farms run by Mr. Bogus, Mr. Bunce and Mr. Bean, who are cruel, horrible men who decide that they're sick of Mr. Fox taking food, although he needs it to survive, and he barely takes anything. They're very selfish, greedy men, so they decide to try and kill him. And once they don't succeed in killing him by shooting him, they then decide to dig up the tree. And this is just a short story about how Mr. Fox outsmarts them, along with all the other woodland creatures and all the other underground creatures, rather. And they end up happy in the end, which is great. It's such a good read, such a fantastic book, and I absolutely love it. It's the tiniest book and I can go on forever. And next up we have Wilder Girls by Rory Power. Can we just appreciate how pretty this cover is? This is the UK cover, and I absolutely love the pink as opposed to the black that the US cover seems to have. Love it. Beautiful cover. I picked this up because Books and Lala was going on about it quite a lot. It is supposed to be, I think, a body horror. These girls are on an island which holds their school when they're infected by what is known as the tox, and this causes mutations in the girls. They all have different things that happen to them, and they're quite gruesome things, and when they have flare-ups there's a potential that it could kill them. And this is basically following the girls on this island waiting for help, and then our main character, her best friend, goes missing, so she goes on a hunt to find her. There's LGBTQIA plus representation in this, which is fantastic. Like, the character is just so dumb she doesn't realise that this other girl likes her, and it's beautiful. It's just, I love them. I love them. But to be honest, I did not like this book. I went into it thinking that it was meant to be a horror, and maybe it's just because I don't read horror, but it wasn't scary. I could see it being scary as a movie, absolutely being scary as a movie, but it just seemed a bit lacking for me. There wasn't that much in the story, there wasn't that much detail. I don't know, I just didn't really like it, so it only got a 3 star. But I think it would make a great movie. And finally, the last 2 books that I read are actually a bind up of the Vampire Diaries books 3 and 4, The Fury and the Reunion. This is a carry on from books 1 and 2, obviously. This is about Elena, Stefan and Damon, who are probably well known from the Vampire Diaries TV show, although this book is vastly different from the show, as they save their town, Fells Church, from evil that tries to destroy it or kill or maim the people in it. This again was for my newts. It was also a reread because I've read the whole series and I do love it, although now reading it after 10 years realise how quite immature, a lot of it is, which to be fair I do think is quite good because they are teenagers, and they are, you know, they act like teenagers. They're not like, oh, I'm a teenager but I'm a mature adult, I'm not like other girls. No, Elena is selfish, Elena is flawed, all of the characters are flawed, and I love that about it, although it is really cringy to read 10 years later. I am counting this as 2 books, as it is a bind up of 2 books, and it's my TBR and my wrap up, so I'll do what I like. Yeah, so that was the last 2. Again, those 2 I read for 2 Newt's prompts. I will be doing Newt's wrap up as well, although I did a Newt's TBR in a different video, which you can go and watch if you're interested to see all the books I've chosen for all of the prompts in the Newts, because like a mad person I am going to be doing all of the prompts. Both of these stories get a 3-star. As I said, it's quite cringy, and yeah, so hopefully as I reread it gets better. So thank you for watching, and I really hope you enjoyed this video. Next video I'm going to do, I'm not entirely sure, I'll come up with something. I do want to do the do I have that book tag, but currently because we are going to be painting upstairs, my library room is full of furniture and I can't get to my bookshelves, which is fabulous. So fingers crossed that'll get done quickly and we'll get the room back to order and I can do the do I have this book tag. I also then want to follow up with do I have this other book tag, and yeah, so I'm looking forward to that. That's going to be fun, and I will see you next time. Bye!